More than 3,000 years ago, an enslaved people rose up against the greatest empire in the ancient world. A charismatic leader, 10 plagues, a split sea, and a long journey through the desert. This is the story of the Exodus, one of humanity's most powerful narratives. But what is fact and what is faith? Today, we will explore the Exodus and the story of the Hebrews, from Egypt to the Promised Land. The history of the Hebrews begins with Abraham, a nomadic shepherd who, according to the Bible, received a divine calling to leave the city of Ur in Mesopotamia and head towards Canaan. His descendants would form the 12 tribes of Israel, but the journey was long. Famine drove them to Egypt, where in time they became enslaved. Here begins the saga that would forever mark the identity of the Hebrew people, the Exodus. Moses was saved from death by being placed in a basket and thrown into the Nile River. Raised in the Egyptian court, he rebels against the oppression of his people. Fleeing into the desert, Moses receives a call from God in a burning bush. He becomes the chosen leader to free the Hebrews. According to the book of Exodus, the story of Moses, the Hebrew leader, is crucial to the narrative. As a young man, he kills an Egyptian who was beating a Hebrew and flees to Midian, where he becomes a shepherd. There, God appears to him in a burning bush and calls him to free the Hebrews from slavery. Moses returns to Egypt to face the Pharaoh, but he refuses to free the people. So God puts 10 plagues on Egypt, as Pharaoh's heart was hardened throughout this whole process, and they are the transformation of the water of the Nile into blood. Moses and Aaron obeyed the Lord's command. While Pharaoh and his servants watched, Aaron raised his staff and struck the water in the Nile, and it turned into blood. Exodus 7:20. Frog infestation. The Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and tell him, 'This is what the Lord says, let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse, I will fill your entire territory with frogs. The Nile will swarm with frogs, and they will come up into your dwelling, your bedroom, your bed, the houses of your people, your ovens and your kneading troughs. The frogs will come up on you, on your people, and on all your servants.'" Exodus 8:1-4. Lice infestation. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron to stretch out his staff and strike the dust of the land, and the dust will become lice throughout all the land of Egypt." Exodus 8:16. Fly infestation. The Lord said to Moses, "In the morning you shall go and stand before Pharaoh as he goes out to the riverbank, and say to him, 'This is what the Lord says, let my people go that they may worship me. If you refuse, I will send flies on you, your people and your houses. The houses of the Egyptians will be invaded by flies, and the land in which they live." Exodus 8:20-21. Death of animals. If you refuse, if you persist in holding it back, the hand of the Lord will be heavy on your animals that are in the field, on the horses, on the donkeys, on the camels, on the oxen, and on the sheep. There will be a severe plague. However, the Lord will make a distinction between the animals of the Israelites and those of the Egyptians, and nothing that belongs to the Israelites will perish. Exodus 9:2-4. Sores and ulcers. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Take your 2 handfuls of ashes from the furnace, and let Moses throw it toward the sky in the sight of Pharaoh. It will become dust that will spread throughout all Egypt, and throughout Egypt there will be boils breaking out in sores on people and animals." Exodus 9:8-9. Hailstorm. The Lord said to Moses, "You shall present yourself early in the morning before Pharaoh and say to him, 'This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says, let my people go so that they may worship me, because this time I will unleash all my plagues on you, your servants and your people, so that you may know that there is no one like me in all the earth. If you persist in preventing my people from leaving, then at this time tomorrow I will rain down hailstorms such as have never been seen in Egypt since its inception to this day." Exodus 9:13-18. Locust infestation. The Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over Egypt so that locusts will come over it and invade Egypt and devour every plant in the land, everything left by the hail." Exodus 10:12. Darkness and gloom. Moses stretched out his hand toward the sky, and for 3 days thick darkness came over all Egypt. During those 3 days no one could see one another, and no one got up from where he was. But all the Israelites had light in the places where they lived. Exodus 10:22-23. Even after all these 9 plagues had devastated Egypt, Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, not allowing the liberation of the Hebrew people, and then came the 10th plague, death of the firstborn. That same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both man and beast, and I will execute judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign against the houses where you are. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. The plague of destruction will not touch you when I strike Egypt. Exodus 12:13. With this plague, Pharaoh had his firstborn killed. This was a very hard blow for Pharaoh, who, surrendering, allowed the Hebrews to leave. According to the Bible, during the Exodus, Egypt suffered 10 plagues. Even though he had authorized the departure of the Hebrew people from Egypt, Pharaoh regretted his decision and decided to pursue the people chosen by God through the desert. The climax of the escape was the crossing of the Red Sea. The biblical narrative says that the waters opened, allowing the Hebrews to pass through and closing over the Egyptians. A miracle according to faith. But what do scholars say? The biblical narrative tells us that the repentant Pharaoh was in a frenzy in his chariot and, together with his generals, tried to pursue the Hebrews to the Red Sea. But when he tried to cross the waters, they closed again, burying him and his soldiers. After the victory, Moses and his people spent 40 years in the desert until they reached the Promised Land, which they would not enter. The Exodus narrative was fundamental to the formation of Jewish identity. Exodus, by the way, means exit in Hebrew. This account is in the book of Exodus, in the Old Testament, among the books of the Pentateuch, or Torah, which are the first 5 books of the Old Testament. From the Exodus onwards, the Jewish people began to consider themselves free and servants only of Jehovah, without human masters or lords. Today, the Exodus is part of the cycle of Jewish spring festivals, along with Purim and the Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot, which commemorates the Hebrews' stay in the desert. The impact of the Exodus on the history of humanity is undeniable, especially for Christianity and Judaism, as it marked the history of the liberation of the Hebrew people from slavery in Egypt. For Christians, Moses is an important character. In the New Testament, Jesus is compared to Moses, and the Gospel of John states that Moses gave the law, prefiguring the coming of the Messiah. According to the book of Exodus, the story of Moses, the Hebrew leader, is crucial to the narrative. The exodus of the Hebrew people from Egypt to the Promised Land is one of the most important events in the history of Judaism. According to the Bible, the exodus from Egypt was a moment of liberation, but also of salvation, as the Jewish people were mortally threatened in Egypt. Despite being a large group, the Hebrews were seen as cheap labor, which made them important parts of the Egyptian economy. The Egyptians considered the Hebrews as property, preventing them from gathering as families. In the Christian view, Moses is a symbol of Christ, the Messiah who frees the Jewish people from Egypt, showing that God is faithful to his promises. In the Exodus, God demonstrates power and love by freeing the Hebrew people from slavery in Egypt. For Muslims, Moses is one of God's prophets, and the Exodus is a moment when God proves his power. In Islam, Moses is considered a prophet, and the Exodus is an example of God's intervention in history. After the victory, Moses and his people spent 40 years in the desert until they reached the Promised Land, which they would not enter. Moses died before entering the Promised Land, and Aaron was the leader in entering the Promised Land. Aaron died on Mount Hor at the age of 120. We do not know exactly where the Exodus took place. The exact location of the Exodus is still uncertain, but the most accepted theories indicate that the departure from Egypt took place in the Sinai Peninsula. Archaeology has been searching for evidence of the Exodus for decades. Some people claim that there is no conclusive evidence of a mass migration across the desert. Others point to Egyptian records of a people called the Habiru, whom some associate with the Hebrews. Findings in Canaanite cities show destruction consistent with the arrival of a new people. Could this be evidence of the conquest of the Promised Land? The narrative of Exodus leads us to reflect on the struggle for freedom, faith, and the relationship between man and divinity. The story of Moses and the Hebrew people continues to inspire and challenge Christians and Jews to this day. The story of the Exodus, the Hebrew people, and the role of Moses is one of the most important events in human history. The biblical narrative invites us to reflect on the human condition and to seek freedom and justice. Although the Exodus is considered a historical event by Christians and Jews, scholars around the world are trying to unravel the mystery behind the story. For scholars, the Exodus is an enigma. Was it a real event or a symbolic account? Initially, it is believed that the Exodus narrative was written to strengthen the faith of the Jews during the exile in Babylon. Whether read as a historical account or a spiritual metaphor, the Exodus shaped the identity of a people and influenced all of Western civilization. In the end, the Exodus becomes a metaphor for overcoming and faith. Even in the face of disbelief, God frees his people and guides them to the Promised Land. And so we come to the end of another important episode in world history. If you liked it, leave your like, subscribe to our channel, and in the next video we will talk about ancient Greece and the democracy of Athena. Until next time.